In the grand and distant kingdom of Valoria, a proud tradition ruled the hearts and minds of its people. At the center of this ancient society was Princess Aveline, a leader known for her wisdom and strength. From an early age, Aveline was taught that her duty was to serve her people with honor, and that the ancient royal edict would guide her every decision. The edict was clear: all male suitors, no matter how noble or kind, must be rejected. This rule had been passed down through generations and was a cornerstone of Valorian tradition. Princess Aveline was both admired and respected for her firm adherence to the edict. With her gentle grace and steadfast resolve, she ruled a kingdom that prized intellect, courage, and independence above all. The people believed that by rejecting the advances of all males, she was safeguarding the purity and strength of Valoria. In the royal palace, many hoped that Aveline's strength would lead the kingdom into a new era of prosperity, though some secretly wished she might experience the joys of love. For many years, the princess had turned away every proposal and every kind word. She believed that her purpose was to lead, and that personal attachments might weaken her resolve. Yet, despite her success in governance, a quiet loneliness filled her heart. Deep inside, Aveline wondered if there might be more to life than duty alone, though she dared not admit it. One day, as the palace buzzed with the usual activity of court life, a new rumor began to spread among the people. Whispers spoke of a strange visitor from a distant world, a human who had traveled across the stars to arrive in Valoria. The news was met with mixed emotions. While some courtiers feared that the visitor might disrupt the ancient traditions, others felt a spark of excitement at the prospect of change. At a grand assembly in the palace hall, the court gathered to learn more about this unusual traveler. Princess Aveline listened carefully as her advisors described the human's long journey, his determination, and the mystery that clung to his name. Even as she maintained her loyalty to the royal edict, a curious part of her began to wonder if this stranger could challenge the old rules that had kept her isolated for so long. In the days that followed, the palace prepared for the visitor's arrival. Servants polished marble floors, and guards practiced their routines. Yet in the quiet moments before the meeting, the princess often retreated to her private chambers, standing by a large window as she gazed at the starry sky. There, in the silence of the night, she felt a strange mix of anticipation and worry. Could this human be the one to awaken feelings that the strict laws of Valoria had long kept hidden? Thus, the stage was set. The old ways were about to be tested by a force of change, and Princess Aveline stood on the brink of a new beginning. In the soft glow of twilight, she quietly prepared herself for the arrival of the stranger, unaware of the fate that awaited her and her ancient kingdom. Across the endless expanse of space, a small, sleek spacecraft journeyed toward the distant planet of Valoria. Inside the ship, Captain Jonathan Rice sat at the helm, gazing out at the vast, star-filled sky. His heart beat quickly with a mix of excitement and a touch of nervousness. This mission was unlike any he had ever undertaken. He was leaving his home on Earth to explore a new world, one with ancient customs and a mysterious past. Captain Rice was chosen for his wisdom and kind spirit. Back on Earth, he was known as a problem solver and a peaceful diplomat. Now his task was to represent his people and share the warmth of human culture with a society that had long held to old, unyielding traditions. The journey was long and full of challenges, but his determination and hope carried him forward. As the ship neared Valoria, the view outside changed dramatically. A dazzling city spread out beneath him, crowned by a majestic palace that glowed under the light of a nearby star. The captain felt a surge of wonder. He remembered the tales he had heard about Princess Aveline, the ruler of this world, a leader famed for her strength, wisdom, and strict adherence to ancient rules. Yet he also sensed that beneath her firm exterior lay a hidden longing for change. When the ship landed in the palace courtyard, the atmosphere grew tense with anticipation. Valorians, clad in elegant robes, gathered in small groups, whispering among themselves. Some eyes looked on with suspicion, while others shone with hope and curiosity. With calm confidence, Captain Rice stepped out onto the cool stone floor. His simple, respectful greeting and sincere smile immediately captured the attention of the gathered crowd. News of the human visitor quickly reached Princess Eveline. In her private chamber, she listened as her advisors described the man who had arrived from a far-off world. Though she had long upheld the royal edict that kept her isolated from male suitors, something about this visitor stirred a quiet interest within her heart. Eveline was known for her unyielding nature, but now a spark of wonder began to flicker. In the grand hall, the captain was led before the royal court. With clear, simple words, he said, "I come from Earth, a place where many ideas grow and people learn from one another. I am here not to change your ways, but to share knowledge and friendship." His voice was gentle and steady, and his words touched everyone present. The room filled with a sense of cautious hope as his message reached even the most skeptical of hearts. That day, Captain Rice's arrival marked the beginning of a new chapter for Valoria. The ancient rules were gently questioned by the fresh, warm spirit of the human, and for the first time in many years, the princess felt the promise of a future where old barriers might finally fall away. The visitor's arrival strongly promised great hope for a bright, united future. "You said." Princess Eveline sat on her grand throne, her posture straight and her expression calm. The royal court was gathered, their eyes fixed on the human visitor who now stood before them. Captain Jonathan Rice met their gazes with confidence but without arrogance. His dark eyes scanned the room, taking in the rich golden pillars, the silk banners flowing from the ceiling, and the curious yet cautious faces of the Valorians. The silence stretched, heavy with expectation. Finally, the princess spoke. "You have come from a faraway world," Eveline said, her voice steady and regal. "What is your purpose here, human?" Jonathan bowed slightly, a respectful but not submissive gesture. "I come in peace, Princess Eveline. I am not here to challenge your ways or demand change. I only seek to understand and learn." A murmur ran through the court. Some nodded in approval, others whispered among themselves, uncertain of this outsider. The princess studied him closely. He did not speak like the suitors she had rejected before, those who had come with demands, expecting her to submit to outdated traditions of power and control. This human was different. "And what does your world teach about leadership and strength?" she asked, her piercing gaze locked on his. Jonathan smiled slightly. "On Earth, strength is not measured only by power, but by the ability to listen, adapt, and grow. A true leader is one who serves, not just rules." Eveline's eyebrows lifted just a fraction. His words intrigued her, though she would not admit it. The room remained silent as she considered her next words. "You speak well, Captain Rice, but words alone do not prove a man's worth," she finally said. "That is true, Your Highness," Jonathan agreed. "That is why I do not ask you to believe me just yet. Let my actions speak for themselves." Eveline leaned back in her throne, observing him closely. There was something refreshing about his honesty, something almost disarming. She had spent her whole life rejecting suitors who tried to impress her with riches, power, or flattery. But this man did not try to win her over. He only sought to be understood. For the first time in many years, she felt challenged, not in battle, but in thought. "You will stay in Valoria for a time," she declared, her voice strong. "We shall see if your actions match your words." Jonathan nodded. "I would be honored." The court session ended, and as the human turned to leave, Eveline found herself watching him a little longer than she intended. There was something about him that unsettled her, not in a way that made her wary, but in a way that made her curious. And curiosity, she knew, could be the first step toward something far greater than tradition. The evening air in Valoria carried the soft scent of blooming starflowers as Captain Jonathan Rice wandered through the royal gardens. It had been a long day of formal introductions, but his mind was still occupied with the encounter he had with Princess Eveline. She was unlike any ruler he had met, strong, intelligent, and bound to traditions that kept her distant from others. Meanwhile, inside the palace, Aveline sat in deep thought. The human was different from the suitors she had rejected before. He did not seek to impress her with wealth or power. Instead, he spoke with confidence and curiosity, challenging her ideas in a way no one else had dared. Yet she could not allow herself to be swayed so easily. Valorian customs were clear. Only those who proved their worth through action, not just words, could earn respect. By morning, a royal decree was issued. The human visitor shall undergo the trials of wit, the court advisor announced before the gathered nobles. A contest of intelligence, creativity, and strategy. If he truly wishes to learn from Valoria, he must prove his mind is worthy. Jonathan was not surprised. He had expected some form of challenge. The Valorians were a proud people, and their princess was not one to grant trust freely. Still, he welcomed the opportunity. What do these trials involve? Jonathan asked with a calm smile. The first is the riddle of ancients, the advisor explained, a test of logic that has defeated many. That evening, Jonathan found himself standing before an ancient stone tablet in the grand hall. Engraved upon it was a complex riddle passed down through generations. Valorian scholars and noblemen watched in silence, waiting to see if the human could solve what many had failed. Jonathan studied the symbols carefully, tracing them with his fingers as he thought. He did not rush. Instead, he pieced together the meaning with patience. Then, after a few moments, he spoke his answer with confidence. The court gasped. The answer was correct. Princess Aveline, watching from her throne, narrowed her eyes slightly. He had passed the first trial, but there were more to come. The second challenge tested his creativity. Given only a set of basic materials, he was asked to construct something useful, a tool that could benefit the kingdom. While others before him had created weapons or shields, Jonathan took a different approach. He built a simple but efficient water filtration system, something that could help bring clean water to remote villages. The court was stunned. A solution so practical, yet so different from the usual ways of thinking. By the end of the trials, murmurs spread through the palace. The human had not only passed, he had done so in ways they had never expected. For the first time, Princess Aveline felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Not annoyance, not defiance. Curiosity. And curiosity, she knew, was dangerous. The grand hall was quieter than usual, though the air still hummed with whispers. News of Captain Jonathan Reyes' success in the trials of wit had spread quickly. The human had not only passed the challenges, but he had done so in ways that surprised even the most intelligent scholars of Valoria. Princess Aveline sat at the head of the long royal table, watching as her advisors discussed Jonathan's achievements. Some were impressed, others skeptical. But Aveline herself remained unreadable. She had spent years rejecting suitors who tried to win her favor through power and status. Yet this human had done neither. He had not come to impress. He had come to learn. It unsettled her. That evening, as the court dined, Jonathan was given a seat at the royal table. Plates of exotic Valorian fruits and delicacies were laid before him, but he barely noticed the food. His attention was on the princess, who had yet to speak to him since the trials ended. "You remain quiet, Your Highness," Jonathan finally said, his voice carrying a note of amusement. "Have I disappointed you?" Aveline looked up, her piercing gaze meeting his. The room fell silent, all ears on their conversation. "No," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "But you have surprised me." Jonathan leaned slightly forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Surprise is good, isn't it? It means we are learning something new." A small flicker of amusement crossed Aveline's face before it vanished. "Perhaps, but learning is not always comfortable." Jonathan chuckled. "That's true. But isn't growth born from discomfort?" The princess tilted her head slightly, studying him. He did not challenge her in the way others had. He did not demand, did not push. Instead, he simply made her think. And that, in itself, was dangerous. After a moment, Aveline spoke again, You are different from the others who have come before you. Jonathan smirked. I hear that a lot. For the first time in a long while, Aveline felt the corners of her lips twitch in the beginnings of a smile. She quickly suppressed it, returning to her usual composed expression. You are bold, human, she said, standing gracefully from the table. But words are easy. We shall see if your actions continue to match them. Jonathan watched as she left the hall, her elegant robes flowing behind her. The court murmured in hushed voices, wondering what this meant. As he leaned back in his chair, Jonathan knew one thing for certain. He had caught the princess's attention. And that was the first step to something far greater. The night air was cool in Valoria, the twin moons casting a silver glow over the palace gardens. Captain Jonathan Reyes stood near a quiet fountain, watching the soft ripples in the water. The royal feast had ended hours ago, yet sleep refused to come. His mind was still occupied with Princess Aveline. She was unlike any leader he had met, strong-willed, intelligent, and bound by traditions that shaped her every action. Yet, beneath that hardened exterior, he sensed something else, a quiet longing, a silent question she dared not ask. Still awake, Captain? Jonathan turned to see Princess Aveline standing a few steps away. She wore a flowing cloak over her royal attire, her posture as graceful as ever. But there was something different about her now. She wasn't the unshakable ruler addressing a court. She was simply a woman seeking answers. I could ask you the same, Your Highness, Jonathan replied with a small smile. Aveline walked closer, her steps light against the stone pathway. My mind is restless, she admitted, surprising him with her honesty. You have challenged ideas I have held all my life. It is unsettling. Jonathan nodded. Change is always uncomfortable, but discomfort doesn't mean something is wrong. Aveline sighed, crossing her arms as she gazed at the night sky. I was raised to follow the royal edict, to reject all who sought my hand. My duty has always been to lead, not to love. Jonathan studied her carefully. This was the first time she had spoken so openly about her struggles. Who wrote that rule? He asked gently. Aveline turned her gaze to him, slightly taken aback. My ancestors. It was meant to ensure strong leadership without distraction. But what if your heart desires more than just duty? Jonathan pressed. What if true strength comes not from rejecting connection, but embracing it? For the first time, Aveline looked uncertain. She had spent her life believing love was a weakness, that allowing someone close would make her vulnerable. But now, standing in the cool night air beside this human, she felt something unfamiliar. Not weakness, not fear. Hope. You speak as if you know the answers, she said, a small challenge in her voice. Jonathan chuckled. I don't. I just know that every great leader must be willing to question the past in order to build the future. Aveline was silent for a long moment. Then, with a soft sigh, she said, You are unlike anyone I have ever met, Jonathan Reyes. He smiled. I'll take that as a compliment. Adeline gave him one last look before turning away. Good night, Captain. As she disappeared into the palace, Jonathan knew something had changed. A barrier had been cracked, a door slightly opened, and for the first time, the princess who had rejected all others had begun to wonder if this human was the one who could truly understand her. The morning sun rose over Valoria, casting golden light across the palace grounds. Princess Aveline stood on her private balcony, watching the city below as the people bustled through the markets and streets. Life in Valoria continued as it always had, but something inside her had changed. She couldn't stop thinking about the human. Jonathan Reyes was unlike any man she had ever met. He did not bow and flatter like the nobles of her court. He did not seek to impress her with power or gifts. Instead, he asked questions, questions that made her think, questions that challenged the beliefs she had followed since childhood. For years, Aveline had convinced herself that she needed no one. That love was a distraction, that emotions would weaken her ability to lead. But now, for the first time, she found herself wondering, Was she wrong? The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Turning, she saw Jonathan walking toward her in the garden below. He carried himself with the same quiet confidence he always did, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings with curiosity. When he spotted her, he gave a small wave. Without thinking, Aveline descended the marble steps and joined him. "You're up early, Captain," she said, folding her arms. "So are you," Jonathan replied with a grin. "Couldn't sleep." Aveline hesitated, then admitted, "My thoughts have been restless." Jonathan nodded. "Let me guess. You're questioning everything you've been taught." She narrowed her eyes slightly. "You sound too pleased about that." Jonathan laughed. "Not at all. I'm just glad you're asking the questions. Change doesn't come from staying comfortable." Aveline sighed, glancing toward the horizon. "I was raised to believe that my strength lies in my independence, that emotions, attachments, love would weaken me." "And now?" Jonathan asked, his voice gentle. She hesitated, then met his gaze. "Now I wonder if true strength is knowing when to let someone in." Jonathan's expression softened. "That doesn't make you weak, Aveline. It makes you human." A small, ironic smile touched her lips. "But I'm not human, Captain." "No," he agreed, "but that doesn't mean you can't learn from one." Aveline studied him for a long moment. The way he spoke, the way he challenged her without disrespecting her, it was unlike anything she had ever known. He did not see her as just a ruler or a prize to be won. He saw her as a person, and that, more than anything, terrified her. She turned away, trying to compose herself. "You are dangerous, Jonathan Reyes." He smirked. "Now that sounds like a compliment." Aveline shook her head but couldn't fight back the small smile on her lips. "Perhaps it is." As she walked away, Jonathan knew the walls around her heart were beginning to crumble. And this time, she wasn't trying to rebuild them. The palace halls were alive with quiet anticipation. Word had spread through Valoria that the royal court would soon gather for an important announcement from Princess Aveline herself. No one knew what the announcement would be, but the air was thick with curiosity. For weeks now, everyone had noticed a change in the princess. Her once unshakable adherence to tradition seemed to waver, and many believed it had something to do with the human. Captain Jonathan Reyes, however, had no idea what was about to happen. He had spent the day in the palace gardens, speaking with various scholars and learning more about Valorian culture. Though he still felt like an outsider, he had begun to earn the respect of many. Some were impressed by his intellect, others by his humility. Yet, what stayed on his mind most was the princess herself. When a royal attendant approached and asked him to join the gathering in the great hall, he hesitated. What could this be about? He followed nonetheless, curiosity and a small measure of concern tugging at his thoughts. The great hall was filled with nobles, advisors, and high-ranking officials. At the far end of the room stood Princess Aveline, dressed in her elegant robes, her presence commanding. She looked over the crowd, her eyes calm but focused. When Jonathan entered, her gaze briefly found his, and he thought he saw something flicker there. Determination, perhaps, or maybe hope. "Thank you all for assembling," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Today, I wish to address a matter that has weighed heavily on my heart." The hall grew silent. Every eye was on her. Even Jonathan, who rarely felt nervous, found his breath catching in anticipation. "For generations, we have upheld traditions that have served us well," Aveline continued. "Traditions that shaped our identity, our unity, and our strength. But traditions, if left unexamined, can also become barriers. Barriers to growth, to understanding, and to connection." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. The princess held up a hand, and the room fell quiet again. When Captain Jonathan Reyes arrived, I did not welcome him as a friend. I saw him as a test, a challenge to my beliefs, and yet, through his actions and his words, he showed me something I had not seen before, another path forward. Jonathan stood still, his pulse quickening. Was she truly acknowledging him in front of everyone? Aveline took a small step forward, her gaze sweeping the room. I am not abandoning our traditions. I am embracing the idea that they can evolve. That strength comes not from isolation, but from the courage to open ourselves to the unknown. She turned fully toward Jonathan now, her voice firm but warm. Captain Rice, you have shown me that we can learn from each other, that the barriers we thought were immovable can, in fact, be reshaped. For that, I thank you. A ripple of surprise and admiration moved through the hall. Aveline's declaration was more than just a personal statement. It was a bold step toward a new future, one that embraced curiosity, respect, and the possibility of unity. Jonathan inclined his head, his chest tight with a mixture of pride and humility. It's been an honor, Princess. As the gathering concluded, the court buzzed with whispers and speculation. But for Jonathan and Aveline, a quiet understanding passed between them. A connection that spoke of shared trust, mutual respect, and the potential for something far greater than tradition. The days after Princess Aveline's declaration were unlike anything Valoria had seen before. The royal court, once steeped in rigid formality, began to buzz with new energy. Advisors, scholars, and nobles, all previously bound to ancient traditions, now spoke freely of change. The princess had not cast aside Valorian values. She had expanded them, opening a path for innovation and growth. Captain Jonathan Rice remained at the center of this transformation. His presence sparked conversations that had once been taboo. Valorians approached him with questions about Earth's history, its people, and the ways humans solved problems. Jonathan, in turn, showed genuine interest in Valorian culture, carefully listening and offering insights rather than instructions. For Aveline, the shift was both exhilarating and daunting. She met daily with her advisors to address concerns, mediate debates, and shape a future that balanced tradition with progress. Yet, despite the mounting responsibilities, she often found herself seeking Jonathan's counsel. One afternoon, the two stood in the palace library, its towering shelves filled with ancient tomes. Aveline turned to Jonathan, her expression thoughtful. I never thought I would hear the court speak so openly about change, she said. It feels strange, but not unpleasant. Jonathan leaned against a nearby table, his arms crossed casually. Strange is good. It means people are thinking. She smiled faintly. It's not easy to get them to think differently, you know. He tilted his head, considering her words. You've done something remarkable, Princess. You've shown them that their leader can adapt, that you can respect the past while still welcoming the future. Aveline met his gaze, a flicker of admiration crossing her face. And you've shown me that it's possible to see beyond what we've always known. Jonathan's voice softened. You were always capable of that. I just gave you a reason to try. Their conversations grew more frequent, and with each discussion, Aveline's confidence in her decisions deepened. Together, they formed a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared desire to better the kingdom. As word of the changes spread, even the people of Valoria began to take notice. Farmers spoke of new tools inspired by Jonathan's knowledge. Traders brought goods that reflected Earth's influence. The once strict borders of Valoria's culture began to blur, allowing fresh ideas to flow in. It wasn't without challenges. Some resisted, clinging tightly to the old ways. But Aveline stood firm, with Jonathan always ready to offer encouragement. He reminded her that true leadership required courage. Courage to face opposition, to embrace the unknown, and to guide her people through uncertainty. In time, the alliance between Aveline and Jonathan became the foundation of Valoria's transformation. The human's ingenuity and the princess's wisdom worked together to shape a brighter future. What had started as an unexpected arrival became a partnership that changed both Valoria and its princess forever. Valoria, a once isolated kingdom, had become a beacon of progress. The changes did not happen overnight, nor were they easily won. Yet, under Princess Aveline's leadership and Captain Jonathan Rice's guidance, the barriers that once divided tradition and innovation began to crumble. Aveline now stood in the Great Hall, looking out over a room filled with both familiar and new faces. Valorian nobles and Earth's diplomats sat side by side, engaged in lively discussions. On the marble walls, symbols of Valoria's ancient heritage hung beside newly crafted banners that represented the kingdom's embrace of change. Jonathan stood a few steps behind Eveline, observing the scene with quiet satisfaction. When he first arrived on Valoria, he had no intention of challenging its traditions so directly. His goal was simply to learn, to exchange ideas. Yet, by staying true to his principles and showing genuine respect for the Valorian people, he had inspired a movement that neither he nor Aveline had foreseen. "The people seem hopeful," Aveline said softly, turning to Jonathan. He smiled. "They have a leader who's shown them it's okay to evolve. That's not something they're going to forget." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I spent my life rejecting others, clinging to the belief that my strength lay in isolation. But you showed me that strength comes from understanding, from being willing to change." Jonathan's smile grew warmer. "You already had that strength, Aveline. You just needed someone to remind you it was there." The sound of laughter from across the room drew their attention. A group of Valorian scholars was chatting with Earth engineers, their animated gestures suggesting a lively exchange of ideas. It was a sight that would have been unthinkable just months ago. Now it felt natural. Aveline's gaze softened. "You've given Valoria a chance to grow. You've given me a chance to grow." Jonathan shrugged lightly. "I think you would have figured it out on your own eventually. I just sped things up a bit." She chuckled, a soft, genuine sound that surprised even herself. "You really are impossible, Jonathan." "Maybe," he said, grinning, "but you seem to tolerate me." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as their people mingled and learned from one another. The alliance they had forged had blossomed into something greater than either of them had imagined. Valoria had not lost its identity. It had simply become more open, more curious, more united. As the evening wore on, Aveline and Jonathan left the hall, walking together under the light of Valoria's twin moons. The path ahead was still uncertain, but they faced it with a shared resolve. They were no longer just a princess and a visitor. They were partners in a story of transformation, one that would be remembered for generations.